In this film, we're going to be looking at an idea that is pretty much easy to achieve by anybody and one of the simplest portrait setups you can ever achieve. And that's obviously using the likes of balloons. You know, buying 100 balloons online nowadays is probably, you know, just a couple of pound investment into either just blowing them up by yourself, which will exhaust you, or if you want some helium to actually kind of get them to float, like we've seen in this kind of set in a minute, was going to give you some great ideas. But if we're just looking at this first image, you know, without any real cost except for a couple of pounds for the actual balloons and blowing them up in time, you've got yourself a really great set for the likes of teen and tween portraits. Perfect for dancing, for kind of theatre kind of looks as well. And with disguising the floor with the likes of netting or something else, you can really kind of transform a simple set without any real kind of cost involved and things really. So in the portrait we're looking at, they're taken from one of our training days at the old studio, and this is Studio 2, the big window in Studio 2. However, this same look and feel could be created with a big white wall and shining lights behind the net onto the white wall, bouncing it through, or onto a vinyl paper backdrop for floor and wall or whatever it be. In the same way, I'm using the netting to actually give it a little bit of a textury kind of feeling. But you might just actually revert to just actually lighting of the white wall itself. So for me, the key thing was to have obviously the same color. So we're working in the same color palette. Pretty much all the girls that we were photographing were either going to be in white or they were going to be in a subtle tone of pink. There were a few that brought in a few extra kind of outfits and things. But this kind of set can last you for at least a day to 2 days. Especially if you buy a specialist balloon for the helium, the flying ones, which will actually keep the helium up longer, so you'll actually get a couple of days out of it. And if you're working near a daylight window, the heat alone will kind of re-energize the helium for 2 or 3 days, in fact. As far as the overall kind of effect, I wanted to make sure that we had some float in and obviously some at the ground level. And more on the side that we could kick around and everything else with it and things. So there's the kind of the basic floor set if we were using the balloons. You can see that some of them are still flying or trying to fly. We basically put little weights on them, or our kind of background support clips, so that basically we could actually wind the string around them to change the different heights within the image and things really. And that allowed us to be quite versatile as we were going through. Now, in this case, I was using pretty much all the light from the window as my main light source, but we could add in secondary lights, the likes of speed light or studio flash, coming in from either the left-hand side, which would be the 9 o'clock position, or the right-hand side, which would be the 3 o'clock position compared to camera and subject and window. So as far as the daylight is concerned, when we're looking at our set, obviously we have the height, or we had the height, to be able to actually kind of use the full kind of gravitas. But even then, we needed to ensure that the netting was long enough to reach the floor and so on with it. But as I mentioned already, you don't necessarily need to actually use a kind of a netting on there. You could actually try it with a white wall or a white kind of background if that's what you've got. The key thing will be is enough balloons to make it full enough, so you're going to save all the actual kind of Photoshop work and things. So this is pretty much a straight out of camera image. You can see the warmth on the subject because of the pink and because of the daylight bouncing around the whole room. It'll be the same if you're using flash. You're going to pick up some kind of tonality, and as far as the look is concerned, if I expose directly towards the window from the subject's face, we would obviously get more definition in the netting, whereas I basically overexposed by around about half a stop to kind of give more bounce light. If you're working in a dark room and you had all the light behind the subject as far as the white background or a wall was concerned, you might think about running the likes of fill light behind camera position, running about 2 stops less, which will actually give an even fill. Remember, when we're using flash, it's controlling the light source, so you actually get a specular kind of reflection on reflective surfaces likes of balloons. So if that's annoying you, there will be some kind of fixing of that. Or you could try dulling the balloons down with a dulling spray, but that's if you can be bothered, of course. So as far as the kind of the subject's concerned, you can see here when we're exposing for the usual way with a meter, so in other words from the client's nose towards the light source, that's towards the window, you can see the difference in the exposure is slightly dark, and we know she's in a white leotard and tutu, but in fact even though it's white in colour, it's more greyish, it's a muddy white. And so I wanted a light and bright, higher key style of photograph. So that is why we overexpose the image. But as I mentioned, if you needed to add a little bit of fill light onto the subject, or even a big reflector, you could actually put more fill into the scene if that's what you want, like you've seen in this image now. But that is just a personal taste, of course, in the kind of the overall finish. For me, I would try and work with the natural light within the scene, a reflector to the one side, and then overexpose the image. So from this basic image that we've got here now, which is the exposure from the nose towards the light source, either correct it in camera so you know you're slightly overexposing it, or be prepared in the post-production to just tweak the exposure up. That's why you should always use a raw file, so that you kind of maintain the ability to kind of really maximize the detail within the image, without kind of losing some of the kind of the technical element of the file. So when we've done that, when we've kind of overexposed it, we get a lovely bright and light image. The great thing about this, of course, you know, just from shooting above the subject, and if you've got a camera with a flippy back, this is really easy to see because you're literally holding the camera above them and you're just pointing down, whereas when I'm doing it, my camera doesn't have a flippy back with it, and I'm usually tethered, which would take the flippy back out of use anyway. What I mean by a flippy back, sorry, is where the screen pulls out and it tilts so you can see what I'm on about. I'm sure you knew what I meant. But as far as that's concerned, you're just kind of shooting to get variety, and then kind of thinking about the animation, thinking about the pose. But in this case, because all the lighting is coming through the right-hand side, all I've really got to do is make sure that the balloons are not moving too much. It can be a problem on a hot day when you're running fans in studio, that they start to actually kind of have a mind of their own and they start to actually roll around a set and things really. But if you're weighting them down, you should actually have some control. So if you're looking to really create some simple portraits, quite dynamic ones as well, even if you're working in a small space, the kind of investment into a balloon set for a couple of days a year or a couple of weeks a year, whatever you're doing, can really kind of end up with quite dramatic images. And again, I've yet to have a client walk into the studio set where basically it's set in balloons that don't go, wow, and they just can't wait to get involved and everything else with it and things really. So hope you've enjoyed this quick film on some ideas on transforming your portraits, studio with a limited budget.